Welcome to Brew Cheese, where we brew up the finest of cheese. I'm Micah, and thanks for tuning in. If you're new to our channel, we brew up commander decks on a budget. Normally that budget is $50, but we've temporarily extended this to $55, since right now TCG Player Direct is unavailable, and many of the stores on TCG Player are closed, meaning you'll probably end up paying a lot more in shipping costs than you normally would. To reflect that, we've permitted an extra $5. However, we still managed to get this deck in at under our normal $50 budget, so win-win. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, just kidding. The commander over this deck is Obosh, the Preypiercer. Obosh is 3 Rak-dos for a 3/5 Hellion Horror. It can be your companion if your deck has only odd CMC stuff and lands. Most importantly though, it doubles the damage your odd CMC stuff does to players and permanents. There's a lot of directions you can take Obosh in. You could go group hate with cards that damage everyone, or you could cram every good creature you can find in the odd mana costs, maybe a little double strike added in for some real double dipping. I don't know, that sounds pretty fun, but today I'm bringing you a Spellslinger build. Now, I was tempted to just call this a burn deck, since that's certainly one of its win cons, but at its core, the deck rewards you for casting any instants or sorceries, so we're cramming as many of those in as we can. Those burn spells I did mention, almost all of them are X cost spells, which have a variable casting cost while it's being cast, which is where Obosh cares about it. So we take a classic X spell like Fireball, and we declare X to be an even number, and then add the 1 red cost, and it's now a spell with an odd CMC. Since we have so many payoffs simply for casting instants and sorceries, we're including as much of that into our ramp and draw as possible, with a little bit of permanent ramp and draw thrown in. That ramp kicks off with Dark, Pyretic, and Desperate Rituals. They each produce 3 mana for a lesser investment, allowing us some explosive turns. The ritual-type ramp pieces continue with Seething Song, producing 5 red for the cost of 3 mana, and Ironcrag Feet, giving us 7 mana for only 4. That mana does come with the stipulation that we're limited to 1 more spell this turn, but 1 more spell is often all we'll be playing anyway. Mana Geyser gives us a red for each tapped land our opponents control. Depending on the flow of the game, this could be quite a lot. Given 3 opponents, with just an average of say 5 tapped lands each, that's 15 red mana. Runaway Steamkin gets a +1/+1 counter every time you cast a red spell to a max of 3, and you can cash in 3 counters to add 3 red. Culligan Monument taps for either of our colors, and by paying 4 black-red, it turns into a 4/4 flying dragon until end of turn. Since this card has an odd CMC, this gives us another avenue to use this mana rock in to chip in 8 in the air whenever we don't need it for something else. Rak-dos Signet is probably to be expected in a Rak-dos deck. You know what Signets do. Prismatic Lens either taps for colorless or taps to let us filter a mana. And Star Compass taps for black or red, so long as we have a swamp or mountain accordingly. For draw, we're starting with Browbeat. An opponent of your choice has to make a very tough choice, since they'll either take 5, 10 with Obosh out, or let you draw 3. Most of the time you'll get to draw the 3, but if they do take the 10, well, that still works fine for us. Along those lines is Risk Factor, also an odd CMC spell, and so they'll have to choose between 8 damage or 3 cards. This also has Jumpstart, allowing us to cast it 1 more time from our graveyard by discarding a card. Ambition's Cost and Ancient Craving are the same card, both drawing us 3 at the cost of 3 life. Siphon Mind most of the time will draw us that many as well, provided 3 opponents and none of them are empty-handed. It makes each of them discard a card, and we draw cards equal to the number of cards discarded. Read the Bones lets us scry 2, and then we draw 2 and lose 2. Note that even though this is an odd CMC spell, it's loss of life and not damage, so it won't be doubled by Obosh. That's the reason why a card like Midnight Reaper would not have been a very good fit for the deck. Underworld Connections lets us devote 1 of our lands to being able to tap to draw us a card and lose us 1 life. Bloodgift Demon is pretty similar, drawing us a card on our upkeep and taking 1 life from us. We can hit an opponent for 1 with this if we need to do just that for that 1 extra point, but often it's going to be us. Another upside of Bloodgift Demon is that it's an odd CMC creature, so as long as the skies are clear, not only do we get the card draw, but we can also bash in for 10 points in attack. Tapestry of the Ages lets us pay 2 and tap it to draw a card, provided we've cast a non-creature spell this turn. Night Dealings isn't exactly card draw, but it's even better for us. Every time one of our things damages a player, we put theft counters on it equal to the amount of damage dealt. Then we can pay 2 and 2 black, remove some number of theft counters, and tutor up something with that number CMC. Since a lot of our damage is going to be straight to the face, this will let us basically have a reusable Diabolic Tutor. We can also tutor up a lot of our burn spells at the cost of only a few theft counters, since most of those are CMC 1 or 2. Alright, let's go ahead and cover that face meltage I keep mentioning. We'll start off with a group of X and a red spells that, at their core, all do the same thing. Banefire, Burn from Within, Crater's Claws, Demon Fire, Devil's Play, Disintegrate, Fireball, and Red Sun Zenith each do X to any target. Banefire can't be countered if X was 5 or more. Burn from Within strips indestructibility off a creature it targets and exiles it if it kills it. Crater's Claws deals an extra 2 damage if you have a creature with power 4 or more. While our commander doesn't have power 4 or more, we do have a handful of 4 power and up creatures in the deck. Demon Fire exiles any creature it kills, and if you're empty-handed, can't be countered or prevented. Devil's Play lets us flash it back to use a second time for 3 red and X, while Disintegrate exiles any creatures it kills and keeps them from regenerating. Not super common, but the exile part is pretty handy. Fireball lets us pay 1 for each target beyond the first, and you divide up the damage equally among all the targets. Red Sun Zenith also exiles creatures it kills and gets shuffled back into our deck. As long as X is an even number for any of these, Obosh will double the damage output. Electro Dominance not only deals X damage to a target, it lets us cast something X or less for free. You'll want X to be an odd number if you want Obosh to double the damage here, however. That also applies to Rolling Thunder, which lets you freely divide up the damage of X among any targets you like. Since Obosh is doubling the damage assigned to those targets, you can hit a much wider number of them than you normally would be able to. Jaya's Immolating Inferno deals X to up to 3 targets, but can only be cast if we have a legendary creature or planeswalker. Although we'd prefer to cast this with our commander out, there's 2 other legendary creatures in the deck if we can't for some reason. If the commander is out, it's very possible to finish off all 3 opponents in one hit with this spell. Fall of the Titans is pretty similar, although it costs a red and double X, or red and X if we have cast another spell this turn. It'll deal X to up to 2 targets. Now, the CMC of Fall of the Titans is a little interesting, but it works out in our favor. If you cast it for its surge cost, when determining its actual CMC that Obosh is concerned with, you look at the normal mana cost at the top right of the card, and use whatever you determined X to be as the value of both of those X's there. So, if you paid a red and 5 to cast it for its surge cost, then the CMC will be 5 plus 5 plus 1, or 11. If X was 4, then the CMC is 4 plus 4 plus 1, or 9. What this means is that if you are casting Fall of the Titans for its surge cost, it does not matter what the value of X is, because Obosh always sees it as an odd CMC. Incendiary Command has a few uses, all of them good for us. We pick any 2, to deal 4 damage to a player, 2 to each creature, destroy a non-basic land, or everyone discards their hand and draws the same number of cards they had before. Since the command is an odd CMC, those first 2 options are especially nice, especially since Obosh has 5 toughness and will survive the 4 damage to each creature. Corvette's Fury lets you pick who is a friend and who is a foe, and each friend wields their hand, while each foe takes damage equal to their hand size. This is also an odd CMC spell, so if a foe has a full hand of 7, they'll take 14 damage. Not too shabby for a 5 mana spell. Draco Seth, Maw of Flames, while not a direct damage spell like the others, does all the wrecking of 1. It is an odd CMC creature, so when it attacks and Obosh is out, it deals 8 damage to one target and 6 to 2 others, and then itself hits for 14. We have more than a few payoffs for casting all these instants and sorceries that'll really help us with our game plan. Aria of Flame gives everyone else 10 life when it enters, which is a pretty big downside, true. But every time you cast an instant or sorcery, you put a verse counter on it. And then however many verse counters are on it, it deals that much to another player or planeswalker. It being an odd CMC, this damage stacks up pretty quickly. We're also running its older cousin, Sphinxbone Wand, which more or less does the same thing, but also lets you point that damage at creatures, and doesn't have the downside of giving everyone else life. Normally the wand would be way too slow in Commander at 7 mana, but with Obosh doubling its damage output, it's right at home in this deck. Gutter Snipe is the ultimate value generator here, dealing 2 damage or 4 to every opponent every time we cast an instant or sorcery. You can drop this thing early and really start racking up the damage. Speaking of early plays, Blister Spit Gremlin is one of the best new commons out of Ikoria, and I even featured it in my list of the top commons and uncommons. You can tap it and pay 1 to deal 1 damage to each opponent, and it untaps each time you cast an instant or sorcery. It's a 1-drop, so it can come down super early and generate value whenever you have the extra mana to spend on it. But because 1 is also an odd number, our commander bumps that up to 2 damage to each opponent anytime we have the spare mana and are casting our spells. Cinder Pyromancer taps to deal 1 damage to target player, and anytime you cast a red spell, untap it. It's an odd CMC, so it gets doubled up as well. Dynavolt Tower gives us 2 energy every time we cast an instant or sorcery. We can cash in 5 of that energy and tap it to deal 3 damage to any target. But because this is an odd CMC card, we get to dole out 6 damage every time we rack up the energy. We're also doing a little double-double to toil up some trouble. Angrath's Marauders doubles all of our damage, and because it itself is an odd CMC, it deals a whopping 16 damage on its own. Dictate of the Twin Gods doubles all damage across the board for everyone. That may seem like a little bit of a bad idea giving this to opponents too, but there are 2 factors working in our favor. One, that with this out, opponents will hopefully appreciate that keeping you alive helps them to keep hitting each other harder, and 2, that our damage output should be higher than most of the other players can achieve. Ambermaw Hellion adds 1 to all of our other red sources of damage, and since this applies to the source of damage, Obosh doubles it if that source is odd. Ambermaw is odd on its own, so if you do decide to use it in combat, it has trample and hits for 8. Torbrand, Thane of Redfell, adds 2 to all of our red sources as well, and even better, only to whatever damage would be dealt to our opponents and our opponent's stuff. So while he's an even CMC himself, he gets a pass. Fire Servant doubles the damage of all of our red instants and sorceries. It itself is also odd if we need to swing in with it for incidental extra damage. Satyr Fire Dancer doesn't directly double our damage, but it does allow us to safely point more of our burn at our opponent's faces. Whenever we do deal damage with one of those burn spells, the Fire Dancer also deals that much to one of their creatures. There's also a few other miscellaneous payoffs for going instant and sorcery heavy. Runechanter's Pike gives the equipped creature +X+0 and first strike, which is a great combination. That X is equal to the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard. Throw it on one of our creatures with an odd CMC, and it becomes a veritable wrecking ball. Dual Casting is a creature aura that allows that creature to tap for a red to copy an instant or sorcery. Copying instants and sorceries with X in its casting cost retains the value of X, so copying one of our X-based burn spells is really nice. Of course, copying something like a Siphon Mind or an Ironcrag Feat ain't too shabby either. We're running lighter on removal than most of our decks, primarily because we already have so much of that going on in our main strategy, but we're still playing Unlicensed Disintegration, which both destroys a creature and deals 3 damage, or 6, if we have an artifact. There's 11 of those in the deck, so there's a good chance of having a nice little 2-for-1. Detonate destroys a single artifact with converted mana cost X, and deals that much damage to the controller. Although we only get to double that damage if destroying an artifact with an even CMC, it's still nice value if we don't. Builder's Bane destroys X artifacts and deals its controller 1 for each artifact destroyed. It doesn't matter what the value of X is, as the spell always has an odd CMC, so go ahead and blow up however many problem artifacts you like. Rak-dos Charm allows you to exile all cards from a graveyard, destroy an artifact, or have each creature deal 1 to its controller. Although that last ability is a little bit of a non-bow, since it means our own odd CMC creatures will each deal 2 to us, but it's handy against someone who has a go-wide strategy. Our board wipes also take advantage of the damage doubling, although unfortunately most of them are probably going to wipe Obosh as well, but when you need a board wipe, you need a board wipe. Earthquake and Magma Quake both deal X to each non-flying creature, with Magma Quake being instant speed and also hitting planeswalkers, while Earthquake hits players. Of course, if the total comes out odd, then we double it up. Starstorm deals X to each creature, flying or not. It's also instant speed and cycles, so those are both points in its favor. Street Spasm can be used as targeted removal if we need it to be, dealing X damage to one creature, but more than likely we'll be overloading it to make it a one-sided wipe. Making sure X is even if you want the damage to be doubled up, since Obosh only cares about the mana cost and not the overload. Finally, Necromantic Selection wipes the board and then returns one of those creatures to our battlefield. Most often we'll use this to get Obosh back, but if we have to let it go to the command zone in order to get something juicier, so be it. Of course, since Obosh is providing so much value for us, it's natural that it'll be a target for removal. Cloak and Dagger, Mask of Avacyn, and Mirror Shield are all great budget ways to get Shroud or Hexproof on a creature, and any incidental power or toughness they add are just icing on the cake. We're also including Gift of Doom, which can give Obosh Death Touch and Indestructible, the latter of which is super handy when we need to drop one of our board wipes. On to the lands. Cinder Barrens, Rak-dos Guildgate, and Urborg Volcano all enter tapped and give us black or red. Akum Refuge, Bloodfell Caves, and Temple of Malice also enter tapped and give black or red, with the first two giving us 1 life and the last scrying for us when they enter. Lava Claw Reaches also is tapped on entering and gives either color. It can be turned into a 2/2 creature that gets bigger the more we pump into it. Although at CMC 0 it won't benefit from Obosh, but it's nice to have options. Shadowblood Ridge is like a Rak-dos Signet in land form, tapping for a black and a red if we pay 1 into it and tap it. Painted Bluffs, Shimmering Grotto, and Unknown Shores are all exactly the same card, providing either colorless or any color if we pay 1 into it. Because we're fine with a lot of colorless mana, it's nice to have the flexibility. Cave of Temptation is about the same, except adding the ability to pay 4 tap and sack it to put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature. Myriad Landscape is included primarily for the same reason, as colorless mana doesn't hamper us too much, but if we find ourselves low on 1 color, we can cash it in for 2 lands, giving us a slight ramp in the process. Command Tower is just a natural fit in any 2+ color commander deck, and it's pretty cheap right now, having been included in all the new C20 precons. Exotic Orchard gives us whatever mana our opponents have access to, but considering the prevalence of lands that tap for any color and the number of opponents at the table, there's a decent chance that Orchard will give us both of our colors. Spire of Industry may as well be called my signature card by now. It's inexpensive, comes in untapped, and the floor on it is it produces colorless, with the ceiling on it having it produce any color mana. Any 2+ color deck with a decent amount of artifacts should probably be running the Spire. And then we finish up with 13 mountains and 7 swamps. The total cost for this deck came up to $48.18. These prices are powered by TCG Player, not a sponsor, using optimized pricing. The total does include shipping and allows for cards of any condition. Thank you for watching, and if you like what we're doing here, subscribe or share this video with a friend, or leave a comment telling us what we missed or what you'd like to see in the future. See you again next video.